Good evening, my name is Odie Hawkins, and once again, here we are on Monday evening, and I'm reading columns, old columns from the Africa Times newspaper that I wrote in 1966. I thought it would be interesting to read these columns, and we're having such a good reception to the idea that, well, we're carrying on. Zola Salena, my director, writer, love, wife, is right behind the camera there saying, skip the chit-chat and get on with it, which is what I'm doing right now. Okay, this column was written, I was doing every other week, column every other week. So this is for December 15th, mid-month until the end of the month, 31st. And I picked a subject that I was interested in, I thought might deserve commentary. In this case, the column is called How We Were Butchered in the Passing Year. I was looking back at what had happened during the year 1995. And it goes like this. Once again, the beginning of forever is here, and those of us who've seen it happen should rejoice. We should rejoice because millions who were war-ravaged, starving, homeless, spiritually bankrupt, have survived and been saved from those miserable days that seem to last for an eternity. We should rejoice because there are millions of people on this planet who are gracious, gentle, humane. We are too often reminded of how vicious and mean-spirited the human animal can be, seldom asked to think of positive forces. Yes, of course, we know that the Western media, considered by some to be a stepchild of Hitler's minister of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, feeds us garbage so that they can collect expensive waste. Well, those forces we must overcome. For those of us who follow the trends of racial schizophrenia, it is quite obvious that the past year for people of color, and specifically African Americans, was a brutal year to survive. It would require pages to list the church burnings alone, and of course it is never a good year when Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle, is allowed to swing in on our antennas. If that isn't considered a hate crime, what is? Channel 9, 10 p.m. Sunday. Don't allow your children to watch it, and be careful yourself. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote something to the effect that racism would be the biggie of the 20th century. There's no doubt that his vision would have encompassed the 21st century too. Racism is America's cholesterol and is killing more and more of us every day. Fresh water. The simplest proof comes from a casual study of how the mainstream media looks at Africa, for example. As usual, there's not much written in our newspapers or shown on our newscasts about Africa unless there's a catastrophe, a famine, a war, or a coup. In column after column, I was waiting to change that, but there was no need to because there it is. We can call each other and practically shout across the distance. Look on page 18. There's an article about Africa. How is it possible that a continent so huge could escape notice from the mainstream publications to find out why there are no fully fleshed articles on Ghana, or why the Abacha regime is not condemned more intensely by African Americans and others who treasure freedom? What is happening in Northern Africa and Eastern Africa and in the small Africas out there in the Caribbean? One editor, a candid kind of guy, simply said, well, offhand, there's nothing happening in Africa that our readers are interested in. Kofi Annan, a career diplomat from Ghana, has recently been elected Secretary General of the United Nations. One of his first obligations should be the business of making certain that the rest of the world knows where Africa is and what's happening there. Huh? If we stretch the coin slightly, we might be able to say that the African American communities, Haitians, Cubans, Venezuelans, Colombians, Puerto Ricans, Brazilians, etc., are given immediate variations of the African treatment. We are largely ignored unless there's a catastrophe, a crime, or a riot. Of course, there are exceptions to the rule. The exceptions may be frequently found in the movies that our children are programmed to watch. The movies that they're programmed to absorb tend to act as a catalyst for every violent act anyone ever thought about doing. Blow it up, fire it up, shoot it up, or self-destruct. Those 4 pieces of encouragement have to be considered Hollywood's African-American mantra for the 90s and all the way in. It's easy to reach that conclusion when we look at the mogulish attempts to create crossover movie junk. Remember, this is the media column that I'm dealing with. Would the Denzel Washington, Whitney Houston feel-good preacher's wife be considered crossover if it had a couple of hundred extras being blown up by an exploding oil tanker? Or if they were caught in a huge church fire lit by renegade white men, excuse me, and lit by renegade black men who denied Klan membership? They're pissed because they couldn't get in the Klan. Got it. Or set up to shoot it out with whomever. No, none of these scenes would fit the crossover scenario. The cynics who are responsible for crossover ethics would never want to have their children fed a diet of blood, senseless violence, and stupid plots. The crossover movie is designed to make people buy a lot of popcorn and exit smiling. How many gang wars have been fought in theater showing The Preacher's Wife, as opposed to the one showing the 4 sisters blundering through life with Uzis in hand? One of the sisters said in an interview with a fool, "We're not telling people what to do or how to behave. It's just a movie." How lame. As usual, if we judge what we look like from the media perspective, it wasn't a pretty year. And it wasn't entirely the fault of the ex-football player that the orange juice people once loved. Well, I'm going to end it with this next piece because it's short. This takes us to the 1st February in the new year, 1997. Mm-hmm. So why not start?
Rosh Hashanah.
I'm calling it The Night the General Squared Off with the Poet. Initially, my love for Japanese sumo wrestling took me to Channel 18. And later, my desire to find out what other people of other cultures were saying, doing, and thinking. Maybe I was a little bit like Russell, who wanted to know what the Koreans were saying while they were doing whatever they were doing. I discovered it really isn't necessary to speak Mandarin Chinese, Farsi, Thai, Armenian, Japanese, Korean, or Russian in order to get an idea of what's happening in these communities. Did I mention Spanish? No, Spanish. It would be immensely helpful, of course, to know one of those languages, or all of them, but if that linguistic capability eludes us, tune in anyway. Just expanding the ethnic consciousness will make the trip worthwhile. Now, in these times, we become so accustomed to hearing public figures use so many words and say so little that even an Angelou speaks. Even when an Angelou speaks, it's like hearing something pristine happening. January 31st, 1997. While waiting impatiently for a scheduled David Frost interview with General Colin Powell and poet Maya Angelou on Channel 28, yes, I do subscribe, at 9 p.m. I absolutely remoted to channel 18. What do you call it? Surfing. It was a standard variety show in a packed auditorium, and the act was Korean rappers. In a serious effort to leave no doubt in anyone's mind about who they owed their artistic money to, all of the rappers were stylishly dressed in black. A Korean queen, Latifah, with trendy shades, prowled the stage like a card-carrying sister in the hip-hop nation, while her background crew, 6 guys in ninja gear, performed their prerequisite spins and whirls like Taekwondo dervishes on a holiday. Reluctantly, I remoted away from what sounded like the beginning of a Fuji's send-up to David Frost asking Colin Powell to explain who Colin Powell is. I believe he's still alive, so that would be who Colin Powell is. Powell, in his autobiography, An American Journey, was able to go into much greater detail about what it meant to be the son of Jamaican immigrants until he discovered the military life. He skimmed the surface of Frost's soft questioning and gave us the rich history of an exciting life. It was a little bit disappointing, maybe, but that Frost didn't make a great effort to probe Powell's urbane surface, to insist that he reveal some of the Machiavellian maneuvers he must have used as an inside figure during the reign of 3 American presidents. You know he was not just simply an angel. In his book, General Powell just as cleverly avoids the down and dirty in pursuit of a moral high ground. But these are quibbling points. It is the full measure of the man that must be taken. He didn't bite his tongue when he stated his case for pro-choice. It's between the woman, her doctor, and her God. Nor did he skate past the racism that has plagued America since the first racists arrived. Frost neglected to ask Powell 2 white-hot questions that we tossed around our house at the conclusion of the interview. What in the world possessed him to support Robert Doe, one of the most ill-spoken and politically unmarketable presidential candidates this country has ever seen? I said Doe. I meant to say Dole.
Thank you.
Dole, D-O-L-E, but just goes to show you.
40.
And why isn't he running for president against the Vice President Al Gore the next time around? As a reluctant draftee, 1962-64, I would be the last one to promote a general's case, but in this instance, I would have to push past my own prejudices and vote for one of the most capable figures we've had on the scene in many years. My prayer would be that he does not find himself submerged by the gunk and slime of American politics as usual. Maya Angelou seemed to keep David Frost's mouth at a half-mast position for most of the half hour he chatted with her. We can be sure that his constant look of awe would have been edited away had it not been so pervasive. The editor would have been forced to edit Frost completely off the set if he had tried to catch him with his lower jaw held in place. Maya Angelou has been everywhere, done everything, knows everybody, and still speaks about life as though she's still discovering each hour that she lives it. It is totally unusual for a public figure to be as bold and clear as she is. She spoke about being raped at an early age and how she revealed it to inadvertently cause the rapist's death. He was found a few days later dead. I became aware of the power of words, of language, and didn't speak again for about 5 years. She spoke about her early years as a poor little black girl in Stamps, Arkansas, Arkansas, where my mother's people came from. I simply wasn't aware that we were poor. There were so many rich experiences in our daily lives. In one of her books, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, she writes about her life as a young hooker in a Northern California town and how she got past that valley. During the course of the David Frost interview, it seemed that her earthliness and logic was threatening to take television to an attitude where it seldom goes. Exquisite language. That's what she speaks, exquisite, my daughter Gabrielle said. And we understood exactly what she meant. In those, now in these times, we become so accustomed to hearing public figures use so many words and say so little that when an Angelou speaks, it's like hearing something pristine happening. I used to get a headache trying to understand what Bob Dole was saying. And sometimes I get a headache understanding what Bill Clinton is doing. David Frost puffed out clouds that Maya Angelou blew away. I don't think it had anything to do with womanship or her own part. She is just deeper than he is. That's all. And that's where that ends for this period in time, for this moment in time, I should say. The coming up shows will deal with what happened in early February 1997, watching Babatunde Olatunji and the Ghana Drum Ensemble. And then I'm talking about March 1st or the 15th, the culture of violence on television. So those are little advance notices of what's going to be happening. And I got to get out of here.
Okay, your website is www.odiehawkins.com. Your books are on Amazon, and just go on the internet and type in Odie Hawkins. All right. With that,
There it is. It?
Miss.
Okay.